Well, let's do something a little different. I want to take and find some of my favorite places in the Bible and just share brief devotions based on little favorite sections of books. But instead of starting in Genesis, and we'll probably never get through to Revelation, I'm going to go backwards. I'm going to start in Revelation and go forward. And remember, I'm not trying to teach these books to you. I'm just trying to pull out a little nugget here and there. And there's certainly no better place to start than the letters to the churches. We have John on the island of Patmos, and he's being told to write to these churches, and the writing is approximately AD 95, so that's over 60 years after Christ's time on this earth, and so some time has passed. And John writes from Patmos the 7 letters to the 7 churches. And he begins by telling us that the reason that he's writing to these churches is to reveal what things are and what things shall soon be. The second thing that is important to remember about these 7 letters to the 7 churches, and hotly debated by all of the theologians, as to whether these were written to specific churches and applied only to those, or whether this was a letter that was, with all 7 churches being represented, sent to all 7 churches, so that they were each getting the same warnings and the same kind of information. Whether they were literal churches, sometimes hotly contended, or whether they were representative of churches that would be in the future, whether they represent churches of different ages, both past, present, and future, has been hotly debated. We're going to not bother with all of that, but recognize that there's truth in all 7 letters to all 7 churches. So let's begin with the church at Ephesus. And we know this is a literal church. That doesn't mean that it doesn't represent churches of the past or the future. But it is a literal church because Paul wrote to the church at Ephesus, and we know that we know this is a literal church, but the message to the church may be one for the future, maybe one for the past, maybe one for the present that we live in. Here's what he says. The first thing he says is very positive. I know your deeds, your toil, and your discipline. In other words, God knew exactly what was going on in Ephesus. He knew how hard they were working. He knew how they were keeping discipline amongst the church, and he was very aware of all that they were doing. We need to remember that. God knows exactly what's going on in our churches. He knows exactly how hard we're working, or how hard we're toiling, or whether we're taking the proper discipline. He knows. He's all-knowing. The second thing that he does is, after he tells them the good things about the church, he says, I have something against you. And this is a significant thing against them. He says, you lost your love, your first love. You've lost me as your first love. You're starting to love other things more. Maybe it was food and fellowship. Maybe it was good works. Maybe it was just a time of gathering that they had become so much involved in that they'd forgotten what they were there at the church for. They'd forgotten the Great Commission. But there's no question his condemnation of the church at Ephesus is a strong one. You've fallen away from your first love. You've lost your passion. Many couples, after they've been married years and years and years, recognize that their passion is slipping away, that they no longer have the passion and love for each other that they once had, because they've become careless in their relationship. And so we see Jesus clearly telling through his letter from John to the church at Ephesus that I have this problem with you. You've left your first love. You've fallen away. Your passion is gone. And he tells them you need to get back that passion. You need to get back that relationship that you once had. Now remember, in 1 Corinthians 13, which we often read at weddings, he says, if we don't have love, we have nothing. You remember? If you read 1 Corinthians 13 again, you'll remember that's the case. And so he tells them to return to the love that they had. And he gives them a warning. He says, if you don't do those things, I'm going to remove your lampstand. Now, what does that mean, to remove their lampstand? It doesn't mean to lose their salvation. But you see, when you lose spiritual light, you don't have any direction. And there are a lot of churches around today that don't have any direction. They might just as well be Musa Kiwanis, some kind of a civic organization, because they've lost their direction. They don't have a light anymore. They're not going after the Great Commission. They're not growing spiritually, and they've lost all of their love for the Lord that they once had. And certainly we can see that this not only could apply of churches in the past, but it could certainly apply to churches in the present, and maybe even in the future. We'll see churches that drift away from God and just become groups that gather together on Sunday and Wednesday, but don't have any purpose for God any longer, because they've lost their first love. But he does call to the individual, and he says, he that has ears, he that has eyes, he that understands, listen to this word. And so the appeal is to us as individuals. The whole church may not follow. And I remember a good pastor that we had one time said, don't get convoy mentality. If you wait for everybody to be willing to move forward, then you're not going to move forward at all. Move forward with those that are willing to move forward. So if you have ears to hear, if you have eyes to see, if you can hear his message today to you, take a look. Have you lost your passion for God's work? Have you lost your devotion to him? Are you drifting away from him? Well, then he's got a promise. The overcomers, those are going to eat from the tree of life, which is in paradise. So he gives us some practical word. He gives us some perennial word, and he gives us some prophetical word about the church. And he calls us back to our love and our passion for his work, so that we might stay focused on what will glorify him. And that's my thought for the day. God bless you. Have a great day.